The cruiser's engine hummed a lonely tune against the oppressive silence of the Cascade foothills. Detective Ethan Vance, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with 5 years of sleepless nights and too many bad calls, gripped the steering wheel. Beside him, Officer Maya Singh, barely a year out of the academy but with eyes that had seen more than her 24 years suggested, checked the GPS for the 10th time. "You sure about this address, Detective?" Maya's voice was low, careful not to break the fragile quiet. The dispatch note was vague. "Unusual activity, property 417A. And this road, it doesn't even show up on the older maps." "That's the exact address they gave, Singh," Vance replied, his tone clipped. "And no, I'm not sure. But when a call comes in from a decommissioned forestry lookout tower about unusual activity, not a break-in, not a noise complaint, but unusual activity, you take it seriously. Especially when the phone hung up before the dispatcher could get a name." They had been driving for an hour since leaving the familiar neon glow of the city limits, swallowed by a dense canopy of pine and fir trees. The air here was different, thin, cold, and carrying the unsettling smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic. Vance slowed the car as the trees abruptly opened onto a small, overgrown clearing. At the center stood a structure that looked less like a house and more like a decaying secret. It was a single-story cabin, its wood stained black by time and rain, with a porch that sagged like a broken spine. A rusted, skeletal gate marked with the faded number 417A hung half open. "Well, there it is," Vance muttered, pulling the cruiser to a stop. The only illumination came from their headlights, which carved two bright, nervous tunnels into the gloom. They stepped out, the gravel crunching loud beneath their boots, an unwelcome intrusion on the absolute stillness. Vance flicked on his heavy-duty flashlight. "Stay alert, Maya. Something about this place feels wrong." They approached the front door. It wasn't locked, just slightly ajar, inviting them into the darkness. Vance drew his service weapon, the familiar weight of small comfort. "Police. Anyone home?" His voice echoed into the void. Silence. Just the wind whistling a thin, mournful note through the surrounding trees. Maya moved her flashlight beam across the porch railing. "Detective, look at this." Vance stepped closer, scraped into the old, mildewed wood of the railing, deep enough to have been made with a knife or a sharp rock, was a series of strange markings. Not words, but symbols, a looping spiral, a jagged line bisecting a perfect circle, and a repeating motif that looked chillingly like a stylized human eye, but with 4 distinct, evenly spaced dots surrounding the iris. "Tribal? Occult?" Maya whispered, a tremor in her voice. "Maybe. Or maybe just some bored kids," Vance dismissed, though the dryness of his throat betrayed his skepticism. He pushed the door open the rest of the way. The inside was pitch black and smelled overwhelmingly of rot and dust. The flashlight beams cut through the gloom, revealing a room that was sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. Too clean. There was no dust on the worn wooden table in the center, only a fresh spill of deep crimson liquid that had soaked into the grain. "Blood." Vance stated the obvious, his gun hand steadying. Maya's light swept toward a corner. "And Detective, the floor. Look at the floor." Vance followed her light. The wooden floorboards in that area were completely gone, replaced by a perfectly circular, unnerving excavation in the earth beneath the cabin. The edges of the hole were sharp and precise, as if cut by a massive cookie cutter. It was about 4 feet wide and looked impossibly deep. Suddenly, a sound. Not a footstep or a creak, but a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the darkness of the hole. It was organic, wet, and undeniably close. Vance took a step back, pulling Maya with him. "Get out. Now. Call for backup. Tell them we have an active scene, possible hostage situation, maybe worse. And tell them to bring the K9 unit." As Maya fumbled for her radio, her flashlight beam flickered past a piece of paper taped neatly to the inside of the door they had just entered. It was a single sheet, typed. Vance held his breath and shone his light on the text. The message was chillingly simple. You've come to the wrong place. And you've left the door open. Before Vance could fully process the last sentence, the house plunged into total darkness. The single, loud thump from the hole was immediately followed by the distinct clack of the front door slamming shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. They were trapped. And the rhythmic thumping from the earth below intensified, now accompanied by a wet, scraping sound that seemed to be ascending. The sudden, absolute darkness was a physical blow. Detective Vance cursed, dropping into a defensive crouch, his flashlight beam extinguished along with the main power. The adrenaline surge was immediate, cold, and sharp. Maya. Radio. Now. Vance's voice was a harsh whisper, trying to override the escalating thump-scrape sound coming from the earth. I can't. The radio's dead, Detective. No signal, completely flat. Maya's voice was tight with panic, but she kept it low. She was fumbling with the handset, the small red light on the device inert. Vance shifted his weight, straining his eyes in the blackness. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and something else, something fetid and undeniably alive. He was trapped in a box of darkness with an ascending threat. Stay low. Flashlight. Vance commanded, trying to reactivate his heavy-duty light. He cycled the switch repeatedly. Nothing. Damn it. Battery failure? Mine too, Detective. Both lights are gone. Just like the radio. Maya sounded genuinely terrified now. It's like something's draining the power in here. The rhythmic thumping had stopped directly below them. It was replaced by a slow, agonizing hiss, the sound of something large dragging itself out of the hole. Vance raised his service pistol, aiming blindly toward the center of the cabin. He had to assume the worst. Police. Show yourself. Hands where I can see them. The only response was a wet, heavy crack sound, like a large bone snapping, immediately followed by the distinct sound of someone inhaling deeply, a loud, ragged gasp that seemed to inhale the very air in the room. Vance took 2 steps back, his heel scraping against the threshold of the slammed front door. He realized the fatal mistake of the note. You've left the door open. The entity, whatever it was, hadn't entered the cabin. It had been waiting beneath it, and they had just removed its final, flimsy barrier, Maya, the window. Now, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest wall. Just as they reached it, a sound erupted from the center of the room that made both of them freeze. It was a voice, but wrong. It was a thick, moist parody of human speech, pitched too low, too guttural, and speaking in fragmented, echoing sounds. CCC call is WW wrong. The voice seemed to originate from multiple sources at once, reverberating through the wood and earth. Vance shoved Maya against the wall, positioning himself between her and the sound. He pressed the muzzle of his gun against the window pane. A sharp shatter and they had a way out. But before he could fire, Maya grabbed his arm, pointing toward a faint, intermittent light flickering in the corner opposite the hole. Detective. The writing. It's glowing. Vance risked a quick glance. Taped to the wall, slightly obscured by shadows, was another sheet of paper. And the cryptic symbols they had seen on the porch railing, the spiral, the divided circle, the stylized eye, were painted on the paper in the same deep crimson liquid. They weren't just painted, they were pulsing with a faint, sick, yellowish-green luminescence. The sound of the entity moving was closer now, shuffling across the wooden floorboards, wet and ponderous. Vance made a split-second decision. They couldn't run blindly into the woods, especially with whatever that thing was right behind them. He needed to understand the threat. He had to see. Hold tight, he whispered to Maya, ignoring the primal urge to flee. Vance took a stepped toward the pulsating symbols, using the faint, greenish glow to orient himself in the overwhelming dark. As he moved, he accidentally kicked something small and metallic. He knelt quickly, his fingers brushing against it, a cell phone. It wasn't their police issue, but a civilian smartphone, cracked and dirtied. He quickly pressed the power button. The screen flashed to life, bathing his face in an eerie, pale light. But the screen wasn't the lock screen, it was the active camera view, and the camera was pointed at the hole in the floor. Vance saw it for a fleeting second before the phone was snatched from his hand by an impossibly long, pale, multi-jointed appendage that shot out from the floor like a striking snake. What he saw in that moment wasn't a man or an animal. It was a massive, bulbous mass of pale skin, shimmering and wet, barely contained by the cabin ceiling. And in the center of its massive, featureless form, there was not a mouth, but the jagged, blood-rimmed outline of the number 417, cut into its flesh. IT was the source of the address. The phone shattered against the wall, and the guttural voice, now louder and filled with a dreadful triumph, spoke one final word as the shadow lunged. FFF found. The creature's lunge was fast, wet, and heavy. Vance didn't wait to see if the gunshot would work. He acted purely on instinct. He fired twice, the blasts deafening in the enclosed space, aiming for the center mass of the pale horror he had briefly glimpsed. The bullets struck with a sickening, fleshy thwack, but there was no grunt of pain, only a gurgling, wet shriek that sounded less like agony and more like static feedback. The creature's momentum was already upon them. Vance shoved Maya through the shattered window, sending glass raining onto the porch. Go. Run. As Maya scrambled outside, Vance squeezed through the jagged opening right behind her, his uniform snagging on a shard of glass, ripping the fabric and leaving a stinging trail of warmth on his side. They hit the dirt running, heading straight toward the relative safety of the dense woods, away from the cruiser and the cabin. They hadn't gone 10 feet before the cabin door burst off its hinges with a splintering roar. Looking back, Vance saw the structure illuminated for a terrifying moment by the sickly yellow-green glow emanating from the symbols inside. The creature was pulling itself through the ruined doorway, a nightmare made of pale, wet flesh and glistening, segmented joints, dragging its considerable bulk over the porch railing. It's faster than it looks. Maya yelled, gasping for breath as she plunged into the darkness of the trees. Vance kept pace, drawing his last usable item, a small, pen-sized tactical light he kept on his belt loop. It cast only a weak, jittery beam, but it was enough to navigate the treacherous roots and undergrowth. They ran until their lungs burned and the pounding of their hearts drowned out the sounds of the pursuit. After what felt like an eternity, they broke through the trees onto the barely visible logging road, about 50 yards from where they parked the cruiser, the car. Vance wheezed, heading straight for it. He tore open the driver's side door, throwing himself inside and immediately checking the ignition. The key was still in place. He turned it, silence. The battery was dead. Completely, utterly dead, damn it. It drained the car too. Vance slammed his fist against the steering wheel. Maya was already checking the back seat for the emergency kit. We're on foot, detective. We need distance and we need to find a signal. The creature's distorted, guttural voice echoed from the tree line they had just emerged from, sounding closer now. CCC calling, out, not calling out. It's mocking the distress call, Vance realized, his face grim. It's using the concept of help against us. They bolted down the dirt road, leaving the silent cruiser and the cabin behind. They ran for another mile before their exhausted bodies forced them to stop, collapsing behind a large outcropping of mossy rock. We need to figure out what that thing is and how to kill it, Vance said, struggling to regulate his breathing. And those symbols, they were the key. That's why it had them painted. It was bait. Maya, recovering her breath, pulled a small, sweat-dampened notebook from her pocket. She had been taking notes during the terrifying chase. I tried to memorize them, sir, she said, her hands shaking slightly. The spiral, the divided circle, and the four-dotted eye. I think I've seen them before in the police archives. When I was doing research on the old local disappearance cases near the Cascade National Forest boundary. Vance stared at her, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. The missing persons cases? The ones the department shelved as disappeared without a trace? Yes. They were mostly hikers and occasional squatters, dating back decades. They all vanished within a 3-mile radius of the old Lookout Tower 7. The common thread? In every location where clothes or a discarded item was found, there were 3 of those exact symbols scrawled nearby. The department wrote them off as cult markings. Vance rubbed his temples. A cult, an abandoned cabin, a monster in the earth. We need more information than what's in the police records, Maya. We need the local knowledge. Where did they keep the original case files on those disappearances? They're stored in the historical archives at the Blackwood County Public Library, Detective. It's the closest town, maybe 5 miles down this road. If the symbols are what link the disappearances, the library's local historian, Ms. Elara Vance, Maya suddenly stopped. She looked up at Vance, a look of shocked realization dawning on her face. Wait. Elara Vance. That's your mother's name, isn't it? Vance nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the empty, dark road ahead. His jaw tightened. Yes, it is. And I haven't spoken to her in 5 years. But she is the only person who knows more about the secrets of these woods than anyone else. If we want to survive this, we're going to the library. Vance rose, feeling a new, cold determination replacing the raw fear. The pursuit was now a mission. He had to face his past, and the terror that had stalked the Cascade foothills for decades. They reached the outskirts of Blackwood County an hour before dawn, having navigated the treacherous logging roads by the faint, diffused light of the distant town. Blackwood was a place that felt perpetually tired, a town built on forestry and mining that had slowly suffocated under the weight of its own isolation. The Blackwood County Public Library was a squat, imposing building of dark brick, nestled awkwardly between a shut-down diner and a faded laundromat. A single, dusty fluorescent tube flickered over the entrance, casting long, nervous shadows. They slipped inside through an unlocked side door, a relic of the days when the building was never truly closed to the community. The interior was a hushed labyrinth of tall, metal shelves and the musty, comforting aroma of old paper. Maya immediately headed toward the back, past the reference section. The local history archives are in the basement. Ms. Vance should be down there, working on the old county records. She practically lives there. As they descended the narrow, creaking wooden stairs, Vance pulled the small tactical light from his belt again, illuminating a steel door marked, Archives, Authorized Personnel Only. Vance didn't knock. He simply turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was a world unto itself, temperature-controlled, packed floor-to-ceiling with heavy filing cabinets and banks of microfiche readers. Seated at a small, cluttered desk, hunched over a sprawling map marked with red and black pens, was Elara Vance. She was a woman cut from the same resilient, sharp-edged cloth as her son, with keen eyes magnified by reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't flinch or look up, even as the cold air from the main library swept into the basement. "You're late, Ethan," she said, her voice dry and steady, without a trace of surprise. "I heard the news about the dead cruiser and the shattered window on the scanner before the signal died completely." Vance stiffened. "You monitor the police frequency?" Elara finally looked up, her expression tired and deeply knowing. "I monitor the silence, son. And the silence around the old 417 property is always the loudest sound in this county. We need the files, Mom. The ones on the disappearances near the old Lookout Tower 7. We need to know about the symbols, the spiral, the divided circle, and the eye with 4 dots." Elara pushed the map aside and leaned back in her chair. "You went to that cabin, didn't you? After all I told you when you were a boy about the quiet places in these woods?" It was an official dispatch call, Vance said, impatience creeping into his voice. We encountered something, Mom. Something that wasn't human. It was tied to that number, 417A, and those symbols. You know what they mean. Elara sighed, a sound heavy with years of unspoken fear. They mean the binding. That property, 417A, was an old logging claim that became a prison. A prison for a force that should never be disturbed. The people who built the cabin weren't just loggers, Ethan. They were a sect known locally as the Keepers of the Threshold. They used those symbols, the tetrad, to anchor the thing to the earth. She turned and pointed to a thick, dust-covered binder on a shelf marked Closed Cases, 1948 to 1972. The police department shelved it as a cult because it was the easiest thing to believe. The truth is in that book. But the one thing you need to know now is this. The entity you saw isn't tied to the cabin, Ethan. It's tied to the earth beneath it. The moment you drove up there, you fulfilled the condition of its release. What condition? Maya asked, stepping forward. Elara's gaze snapped to Maya, a sharp, warning look. They had to remain unseen and unacknowledged by official authority. The call that brought you there, the fake unusual activity, it wasn't a distress call. It was a formal summoning. The entity needed the police to investigate, to officially document the location, to open the door, and break the ancient warding. She opened the binder and flipped through the yellowed pages until she found a section marked in heavy, confident script. The original loggers who contained it named it the listener. Because it only moves and acts when it hears the sound of human fear, human panic, or, most importantly, human documentation. Vance stared at the file, reading the chilling notes on the first missing person in 1948, a forest ranger who was found completely drained of blood, with the tetrad carved into his chest. If the call was a summoning, Vance asked, his voice low and dangerous, then who made the call? Who brought us here? Elara pointed to a name in the file's marginalia, a name Maya had also noted in her police files. The name of the man who owned the land before the sect built the cabin. Dr. Alistair Kane. Kane was the historian who first researched the ritual sites, Elara explained. He disappeared 3 years ago. His wife insisted he was looking for a way to control the entity, not just contain it. He believed the listener held ancient knowledge. So Kane is the one who made the call. He's looking to use it, Vance concluded. Worse, Ethan. He didn't make the call to the police. He made the call as the police. He was wearing an old, decommissioned uniform from the 1980s he found in the archives. Kane is trying to use the authority of the law, the uniform, to establish dominance over the creature. He's trying to be the new keeper. Suddenly, the lights in the archive room, the only lights working in the entire library, flickered violently, plunging the basement into momentary darkness, only to return with a weak, sputtering glow. From the level above, a sound echoed down the stairs. It wasn't the wet, rasping sound of the listener. It was the distinct, heavy thud of a boot on the old wooden floor. A boot that had just entered the building, and then, a voice, clear, confident, and echoing with manic glee, rang through the silent library. Detective Vance. You found the files. Now, I just need you to complete the documentation for me. Bring your mother, she's part of the ritual now. Dr. Alistair Kane was here, and he was waiting for them. Vance immediately pushed his mother and Maya behind the towering row of metal filing cabinets. The sound of Kane's voice, amplified by the library's echoing halls, was chilling in its calm, unhinged certainty. Kane. This is Detective Vance of the Blackwood County Police. Stand down. We know what you did. Vance shouted back, his pistol held ready, pointed at the steel archive door. A slow, Deliberate laugh drifted down from the upper floor. You don't know, Ethan. You barely even grasped the surface. I didn't just do anything. I initiated a transfer of authority. The listener requires a new keeper. And who better than a man who can speak the language of documentation and law? A figure emerged at the top of the dusty wooden stairs. It was Alistair Kane, a man who looked precisely as a failed, obsessive academic should, thin, pale, and dressed in clothes too loose for his frame. But draped over his shoulders, like a twisted trophy, was a ragged, deep blue police jacket from the 1980s, its patch faded and hanging by a thread. In one hand, he held a heavy, ceremonial-looking iron lantern that cast the entire stairwell in a shifting, yellow-orange light. In the other, he held a thick piece of chalk. I only need one more thing, Detective, Kane continued, slowly descending the stairs. The official police testimony. The documented proof that the tetrad eye is a legitimate sign of death and disappearance in this county. Your mother has the files. You, as an active detective, are the witness. Kane reached the foot of the stairs, stopping just before the doorframe. He looked directly at the row of filing cabinets. Come out, Alara, and bring the documentation. We can share the power. Alara Vance stepped out from the cover of the cabinets, holding the thick, ominous binder close to her chest. Her eyes were fixed on Kane, filled with a mixture of old academic rivalry and profound terror. You're mad, Alistair. The binding is not meant to be controlled. It's a lock, not a key. A distinction for the fearful. Kane hissed. He suddenly raised the chalk and, in a single, fluid motion, scrawled a massive, crude version of the tetrad, the circle with the four-dotted iris, across the steel archive door, trapping them inside. You've acknowledged the symbols, Alara. You've brought the official record. Now, the documentation is complete. The listener can find its new anchor. Just as Kane finished the symbol, the ground beneath the library began to tremble. A low, continuous groan resonated through the stone foundation, rattling the archive cabinets. The air immediately grew colder, and the metallic, fetid smell from the cabin began to permeate the basement. It's here. Maya screamed, looking frantically for another way out. Vance fired a shot at Kane. Kane barely flinched, stepping quickly to the side as the bullet sparked harmlessly off the steel doorframe. Ineffective, Detective. The listener has protected me now. Its power grows with every piece of official fear it hears. Kane roared, a triumphant, lunatic grin splitting his face. The vibration intensified. Dust and plaster rained down from the low ceiling. The symbols, Ethan. Alara shouted, desperately flipping through the antique binder. The keepers created a counterward. Look for the Trinity lock. Vance, reloading his weapon, saw Kane moving with a terrifying focus. Kane was now drawing three new, smaller tetrad eyes on the wall, spaced evenly apart, creating a perimeter. This wasn't about trapping them, it was about preparing the space. Maya pointed to a drawing in the binder Alara held. Detective, the Trinity lock. It's three concentric circles, pierced by a single arrow. It has to be drawn in a naturally occurring substance, like a charcoal stick, not chalk. They used it to seal the original tunnel entrance. It's meant to disrupt the symmetry of the tetrad eye. Alara added urgently as Vance looked around the archival basement. No charcoal, no natural pigment. Only paper, steel, and dust. Suddenly, Maya's eyes fell on the old, dusty, black and white photographs scattered on Alara's desk. Pictures of the original missing persons and the old logging camp, the microfiche. Maya yelled, running toward a clunky, outdated microfiche reader in the corner. She ripped the film roll from the machine. It was made of blackened, carbonized acetate. This is it. Carbon. Natural pigment, she gasped, handing the roll to Vance. Vance grabbed the brittle, black film. He had mere seconds. Kane was completing the third of the new tetrad eyes, the entity's wet, slapping noises now clearly audible from the hallway above. "Get ready, Maya," Vance ordered. "When I draw this, the ward will shatter." We hit Kane, and we run for the woods. Using the edge of the snapped microfiche roll like a giant charcoal stick, Vance raced to a blank spot on the wall opposite Kane. He drew the symbol rapidly and roughly, 3 thick, black, concentric circles, bisected by a sharp, aggressive line that arrowed through the center. The moment the final line was drawn, the air cracked like breaking ice. The tetrad eyes Kane had just drawn on the wall, and the door instantly went dark, the sickly yellow-green light dissolving. The intense vibration stopped. The horrible smell receded momentarily. Kane screamed, clutching his head, dropping the ceremonial iron lantern, which extinguished with a deafening clang. "You fools! You broke the binding. It's free now. It's completely free." As Kane screamed, the true horror arrived. The ceiling tiles above them exploded inward as the listener, a colossal, pale, multi-limbed nightmare, slammed through the library's floor, its massive, fleshy body displacing shelves and sending ancient books flying like shrapnel, the last thing Vance saw before he shoved his mother and Maya out of the basement and through the now unwarded door was the dark, skeletal police jacket of Dr. Kane, being enveloped by the wet, glistening, fleshy mass of the listener, the man's final, terrified gasp. Absorbed into the creature's immense, silent hunger, Vance, Maya, and Alara burst out of the Blackwood County Library and into the pre-dawn stillness. The small town was eerily silent, streetlights hummed, but not a single car moved, and not one house showed a light. "The town is asleep, completely unaware," Alara gasped, clutching her son's arm. The listener's presence, it creates a deep-set paralysis. They won't wake up until it passes. From behind them, the library building issued a horrifying, protracted shriek that was not sound, but pure, resonant vibration. Books and glass from the main floor windows exploded outward, scattering onto the street. "We need to get out of the town limits now," Vance yelled, spotting an old, rusted pickup truck parked haphazardly near the shut-down diner. "Maya, can you hotwire that thing? Give me 2 seconds, detective." As Maya worked frantically on the ignition wires under the dash, Vance kept his eyes locked on the library. He saw it then, a massive, pale shadow moving inside the main reading room, its bulk momentarily blocking the streetlights. It was too huge to fit through the doors. "It's coming through the structure itself," Alara whispered, terrified. "It's shedding the layers of the earth that contained it." Maya twisted 2 wires together. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Vance threw open the passenger door, shoving his mother in first, then scrambling into the driver's seat, he slammed the accelerator, peeling out onto the empty street. He glanced in the rearview mirror as they sped away. The entire facade of the library bulged outward, cracking the brickwork like cheap pottery. "It consumed Kane," Maya said, her voice shaking but steady. "He wanted to be the new keeper, but it just absorbed him. What happens now that it's fully freed?" "It has a taste for documentation," Vance replied, steering the old truck onto the main county road leading out of Blackwood. Kane fed it the idea of authority, of order, of the official truth. It will seek to document its own existence by seeking out symbols of control. He drove for 10 tense minutes until the last of the town's streetlights vanished behind them. They were safe, for now. Alara, who had been silent, pointed toward the back seat. "Ethan, look." Vance glanced over his shoulder. Lying amidst the dirty floor mats and old tools was a piece of fabric. It was dark blue, stiff, and utterly saturated with the fetid, metallic smell of the listener. It was the tattered, ceremonial police jacket that Alistair Kane had been wearing. It shed the uniform? Maya questioned, looking sickened. "No," Vance said, his blood running cold. "It rejected the uniform. Kane wanted the authority, but the listener doesn't need a keeper now. It just needs a target." He slowed the truck and pulled over, killed the engine, and cut the lights. The woods were dark and quiet again, but the silence felt like a breath being held, a target that represents the law. Alara finished for him. Something it can officially document as destroyed. Vance reached for his chest, where his detective badge was pinned to his uniform. He unpinned it slowly, the cool metal feeling heavy in his hand. Maya, your badge. Take it off. We're not police anymore. Not until we kill this thing. Maya quickly unpinned her own badge and tucked it into her boot. They were stripped of their official identities, just three desperate people in the dark. So, where does a creature that targets symbols of control go, now that it's free and driven by a thirst for twisted documentation? Maya asked. Vance looked at his mother. Alara was already shaking her head, dread in her eyes. There is only one place in this county where the records are kept. The laws are housed, and the authority is concentrated, Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. The county seat. The old Blackwood courthouse. It's a 20-mile drive from here, Vance said, starting the engine again. It will move faster than that. Ethan. It has the terrain on its side now. It will follow the abandoned logging tracks and the subterranean tunnels. Alara pointed back toward the town they had just fled. And if it reaches the courthouse, it will document the end of law and order in this county by destroying every record, every file, every symbol of control, and everyone inside. Vance knew what he had to do. They were no longer running from a case. They were running to a battlefield. We have to beat it there. We need to find the files on the original keepers, not just the binding ritual, but the disruption sequence that destroys it, Vance said, slamming the truck into gear. The old pickup barreled back onto the dark county road, racing against the silent, unseen horror that was already making its way toward the center of power. They drove the rusted pickup truck hard toward the county seat, the rising sun still a distant, theoretical possibility. The silence of the woods felt heavier, no longer peaceful, but expectant. The listener is tied to fear and documentation, Vance muttered, trying to piece together a plan while navigating the treacherous, dark road. We broke the binding with a counterward, the Trinity lock. But that only bought us time. To kill it, we need the original disruption sequence. Alara, clutching the ancient binder, was flipping through the fragile pages by the light of the dashboard. The disruption sequence isn't here, Ethan. The original keepers were fanatical about compartmentalization. The binding ritual was kept separate from the ritual for destruction. They feared the knowledge would be exploited. Maya pointed to a margin note in the file on Dr. Kane. Wait. Kane's notes. He mentions a final confession. A single document filed under the name of the last keeper, before the whole sect vanished in 1975. Alara read the note, her eyes widening. The final confession. It wouldn't be in the police archives. It would be in the probate court records at the courthouse. Filed as a will or testament. It's a literal documentation of their final intent. The listener is heading to the courthouse to destroy documentation, Vance summarized. We're heading there to find a single, specific document hidden within the oldest files. We need to be faster. They reached the outskirts of the county seat, a slightly larger, slightly more modern town than Blackwood, but equally silent. The same unnerving paralysis had settled over the streets. The county courthouse was a grand, Gothic structure of gray granite, sitting atop a small hill, a physical symbol of enduring authority. Vance parked the truck several blocks away, under the cover of a thick patch of trees. The old probate court records are kept in the sub-basement vaults. They require 2 different physical keys and a code, Alara informed them, anxiety lacing her voice. I helped organize the archives there years ago. The key for the public access is kept in the clerk's office on the 2nd floor. The second key, the master key, is kept by the county archivist. I know the archivist, Vance said grimly. Mr. Wallace. He lives in an apartment right across the square. Maya, you take the clerk's key. I'll get Wallace's key. Mom, you head straight for the third-floor records room. Find the original building plans. We need to know the ventilation shafts and structural weak points. They split up, moving with the practiced stealth of law enforcement. Despite their lack of badges, Maya, moving like a shadow, slipped into the courthouse. She easily breached the clerk's office, found the key labeled Volta in a locked desk drawer, and was out in minutes. Vance found Mr. Wallace's building. He knocked on the door, then quickly produced a lock-picking kit, knowing time was critically short. He worked with practiced speed, the tumbler pins clicking softly. Inside the silent apartment, Vance found Mr. Wallace slumped in his easy chair, staring blankly at a muted television. He was alive, but completely immobile, eyes wide with the paralysis caused by the listener's approach. Vance found the master key, a heavy, brass key labeled Vault B, hanging on a peg near the kitchen. As he took it, he saw a note Wallace had scribbled on a coaster just before the paralysis took him, heard the wrong kind of call on the old lines. Came from the woods. Sounds like wet paper tearing itself free. It's coming for the documentation wall. Vance recognized the term. The documentation wall was the central vault where property deeds, wills, and historical documents dating back 150 years were stored. It was the listener's ultimate target. Vance hurried back to the courthouse, meeting Maya and Elara inside the main lobby. We have both keys, Vance reported. Mom, what did you find? Elara, breathing heavily from her sprint, pointed to the crude drawing she had made from the blueprints. The sub-basement vault is protected by concrete and steel, but the original builders included an exterior cooling shaft that leads directly from the documentation wall to a storm drain. It's an old feature, probably rusted shut. A weakness, Vance nodded. The disruption sequence must target that physical vulnerability. If the ritual requires a natural substance to draw the Trinity lock, maybe the destruction sequence requires a physical, natural element. Just as they started toward the basement, the power in the courthouse flickered once, then died. Emergency lights, powered by a weak battery backup, bathed the lobby in a sickly orange glow, and then they heard it. Not the dragging or the thumping, but the sound of massive, wet impact from the exterior. The listener had arrived at the courthouse, and it was attempting to document the structure's demise. As soon as the sickly orange emergency lights flooded the courthouse atrium, a horrific impact boomed from outside. Thud. Not an explosion, but a heavy, wet collision, like a massive slab of flesh slamming into granite. The impact came again, harder this time, making the plaster ceiling above them shudder as dust drifted down. It is trying to force its way in. Vance shouted, drawing the pistol he had prepared, even though he knew bullets would be useless. Basement access. Move. They rushed down the dark stairwell. The corridors were unnerving. The dim emergency lights cast twisted ghost shapes out of statues and filing cabinets. The paralysis induced by the listener had turned every court employee into a wax figure, eyes wide open and frozen, amplifying the terror. They reached the vault door, a massive slab of steel. Maya quickly broke the outer lock, and the three of them shoved it open. The sub-basement was a dark maze of rusted pipes and old storage rooms. Elara led the way, relying on the memory of a former records officer. The documentation wall is at the back of this level, she panted. It is the second line of defense, to stop the flooding. Crash. Screech. A piercing sound echoed from above. It sounded like the listener had torn through a main door or a large window and made it inside the building. They arrived at the second vault door, a thick, reinforced steel barrier. This one had two physical key slots and an outdated numeric keypad. Vance slid the heavy brass Vault B key into one lock. Maya inserted the Volta key into the other. They turned them at the same time. "The code," Vance said, glancing at his mother. 2794, the year the courthouse was rebuilt after the '62 fire, Alara muttered, quickly tapping in the numbers. Click. The giant door groaned and swung open, revealing a small room packed with meticulously organized stacks of historical records on steel shelves from floor to ceiling. The smell of old paper, ink, and moldy dust hit them at once. Vance turned on his phone flashlight. Look for any document labeled Final Will or Final Confession of the last keeper's name. They moved quickly along the rows of aging files. Maya found it first. Here. Box 7D, Confession, Elias Blackwood. Maya opened the box and pulled out a thin bundle sealed with red wax. Vance snatched it, flipping through for the most important section. The first pages were remorse and horror over the creation of the listener. The final section contained clear instructions, written in bold black ink. Vance read aloud, his voice echoing in the stillness of the vault. After it is broken from its original containment, the Trinity lock, the listener will seek the documentation core, this documentation wall. It will begin by drowning this chamber in its own material essence, corruptus of ink and paper flesh, with the purpose of permanently consuming all stored records. This is when it is weakest and most vulnerable, for it is fully bound to its source of sustenance. It cannot be slain by fire, for it is part of recorded history. It cannot be slain by steel, for it is an idea. It can only be utterly unmade by the greatest enemy of all archives, living water. During the document consumption, enact the disruption sequence. Take water from a natural, flowing source, preferably rainwater or spring water, and direct it through the old cooling shaft located directly behind the documentation wall. A great volume of living water entering its corruptus matter will dissolve and neutralize the listener's concept. The running water will carry away its counterfeit truths into the storm drains, where it can never again be recorded. Vance looked up at Maya and Alara. Both had gone pale. Living water, Maya repeated, glancing around. We are in a dry vault. The cooling shaft. Alara pointed to a thick, rusted steel pipe along the wall behind the shelves. It goes straight up to the roof, to the gutters and storm drains. It was sealed off years ago, but it could be opened. Scrape. Slither. The pounding from outside had stopped. In its place rose a strange, growing noise, like thousands of soaked pages being crushed together. Vance's flashlight beam swept across the concrete floor, and his stomach dropped as he saw a dark, viscous brown fluid seeping through the gaps of the steel vault door. It is here, Vance growled. It is starting to flood the documentation wall with its flesh. Maya, stay here. Get that cooling shaft open. Mom, with me. We need living water. They no longer had time to search for some pure mountain spring. It poured last night, Alara said, pointing at an industrial valve in the corner of the room, connected to a larger pipe. If the courthouse mains are down, the storm system is still active. This line might connect to the rainwater reservoir. That is flowing water. Vance grabbed a nearby rusted crowbar. He and Alara sprinted back up toward the upper floors, hoping to find an exterior access point, while Maya scrambled up the steel shelves, desperately working the corroded bolts that sealed the cooling shaft. The final confrontation had begun. The sticky, corrupted fluid, part ink, part decaying pulp, smelling acrid and metallic, was now oozing rapidly under the vault door into the sub-basement archive. Maya, her face grim, was clinging to a shelf, frantically working a rusted access panel covering the old cooling shaft. The bolts are completely seized up, she yelled back, her voice tight with effort. I need something to break the seal, now. Meanwhile, Vance and Alara raced back up the stairs to the ground level, the floor above shaking with the creature's immense, uncoordinated movements. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows. They burst into a deserted utility hallway on the second floor, the maintenance closet. Elara gasped, pointing to a door marked janitorial. It's right above the shaft. There has to be a large hose or at least a way to tap into the main water line. Vance kicked the door open. Inside was a cramped room filled with cleaning supplies. He ignored the mops and chemicals, focusing on the large, industrial sink in the main water spigot. We need volume, Mom. More than a faucet can give. Vance spotted a coiled, thick fire hose mounted on the wall. The hose reel was connected directly to the building's pressurized main line, the largest source of running water they could find. This is our living water, Vance declared, ripping the hose from its moorings. Just as he dragged the heavy, canvas hose across the room, a sound of unimaginable devastation ripped through the floor above them. Crack. The ceiling directly over the lobby split wide open. The grotesque, massive form of the listener was now visible through the gaping hole, having torn through the main reading room floor above the documentation wall. It was impossibly large, a towering mound of pale, wet biomass, resembling a mountain of rotting parchment and flayed text. Thousands of eyes, small, dark, and utterly blank, tracked their movement. The sheer presence of it was crushing, a heavy silence that pressed against their eardrums. The listener wasn't moving towards them. It was slowly, deliberately, lowering itself, like an unstoppable, fleshy glacier, toward the central archive room to begin its final documentation consumption. Vance acted instantly. He slammed the coupling of the fire hose onto the water spigot, wrenching the valve open with all his strength. Hisses. The pipe shuddered violently under the sudden pressure. Go. I'll feed the line. Vance shouted, struggling to keep the powerful hose in his grip. Elara grabbed the far end of the hose. The access is in the sub-basement. We have to go through the vault door again. As they dragged the heavy, pressurized hose back down the stairs, they saw the horror waiting for them. The listener's leading edge, a dripping curtain of what looked like compacted library cards and corrupted ink, was already cascading over the edge of the stairwell. Heading for the vault door, they scrambled past it. The hose whipping behind them, they found Maya desperately tugging at the cooling shaft panel, the rust-covered bolts refusing to budge. It's coming in. Look. Maya pointed to a scene where the vault door met the frame. The sticky, dark fluid was now running in a thick stream onto the concrete floor. Vance, covered in sweat and grime, held the heavy metal nozzle of the fire hose. Maya, get down. Elara, hold the line steady. He pointed the nozzle at the rusted access panel. If the rust won't break, the pressure will. Vance threw his body onto the hose, jamming the nozzle directly against the bolts holding the cooling shaft panel in place. He screamed, fire. A violent, high-pressure jet of cold, clear water, the living water, slammed into the rusted panel. The noise was deafening, echoing through the vault. The force was enough to shatter glass and crack stone. The first few bolts shrieked in protest, then tore loose. Metal groaned and peeled back. The same moment, the stream of corrupted pulp seeping into the archive shrieked. It was a different sound this time, one of pure, agonizing pain, like a million voices trapped in wet paper. The sight was terrifying. The moment the living water was introduced, the listener's material essence began to recoil, hissing and smoking where it met the fresh water. It's open, Maya. Get the hose in. Maya, her hands bleeding from the struggle, seized the heavy nozzle from Vance and jammed it into the now gaping hole of the cooling shaft. Vance fought his way to the spigot on the second floor, his legs pumping as he raced against the clock. He twisted the valve on the water line until it was fully open, allowing the maximum possible volume to surge into the hose. Back in the sub-basement, Maya and Elara were struggling to hold the thrashing hose steady, forcing the living water into the darkness of the cooling shaft. The destruction sequence was underway. In the sub-basement archive, the high-pressure torrent of the living water surged down the cooling shaft, aiming directly for the documentation wall and the immense, corrupted mass of the listener that was clinging to the foundation. The reaction was immediate and cataclysmic. From the hole in the ceiling, the full weight of the listener's body was slowly descending, a massive, pale, undulating dome. The dark, sticky fluid, its physical flesh of corrupted paper and ink, was flowing over the archive shelves, dissolving priceless documents into its own substance. But where the cold, pressurized stream from the fire hose hit the creature's mass, the fluid recoiled violently, generating clouds of foul-smelling steam that choked the vault. The creature's shriek was no longer a wet gasp, but a terrible, high-pitched wail of unmaking, the sound of an abstract concept being physically destroyed. Maya and Alara gripped the heavy hose, bracing themselves against the intense pressure that threatened to tear it from their hands. The confession said it's weakest when it's consuming. Maya shouted over the roar of the water and the creature's agonizing noise. It's merging with the records now. They could see the results of the consumption. The parts of the creature closest to the documentation wall were turning black, absorbing the historical data. The surface of its body rippled with the ghostly, fragmented images of deeds, wills, and death certificates, the very records it sought to eliminate. Vance, back on the ground floor, raced into the lobby. He could see the monstrous creature looming through the gaping hole in the ceiling. He realized they needed more than just a direct hit. They needed to create a flood. He noticed the creature's immense bulk had caused a series of heavy support pillars to buckle. The building was structurally compromised, and the fire hose was only supplying water to one section of the creature. Vance pulled out his final piece of working equipment, a powerful, small-scale demolition charge from his emergency kit, meant for breaching steel doors. He jammed the explosive charge onto the largest remaining pipe in the utility hallway, the one marked main sewer access. If the fire line is the living water, this is the earth water. Vance muttered, recognizing the duality the keepers would have used. He set the timer for 30 seconds and sprinted away, diving behind a solid granite counter in the lobby. 30 seconds. In the basement, the floor was now slick with the oily, black pulp of the listener's essence, mixing with the clear, destructive stream of the living water. The fight had become a desperate, close-quarters battle against an abstract horror. The creature's grotesque limbs, long, pale appendages that looked like bundles of tightly wound parchment, began lashing out, blind with rage and pain, smashing filing cabinets into twisted metal scrap. One limb slammed against the hose line, momentarily redirecting the stream toward the ceiling. Hold it. Don't let it stop the flow. Alara screamed, straining against the line. 15 seconds. Vance watched the timer blink. He could hear the creature's wail echoing throughout the structure, the sound of a nightmare being washed away. 5 seconds. Boom. The demolition charge detonated, a dull, concussive thud that shook the entire courthouse. The main sewer pipe burst open with an explosive force, instantly releasing a deluge of dark, filthy, stagnant water, the heavy, undocumented flow of the earth that rushed into the building. The combined force of the pressurized clean water and the heavy, unholy deluge of the sewer water was catastrophic for the listener. The creature began to dissolve, not just smoking, but genuinely melting. Its immense body collapsed into the sub-basement, creating a massive, sucking vortex of pulp, water, and ink that pulled in filing cabinets, broken furniture, and the remnants of the archive. The last part of the listener to vanish was a piece of its surface that had absorbed the police jacket of Dr. Kane, a grotesque, rippling patch of dark blue uniform, which dissolved with a final, echoing, gasp of resignation, silence. The only sound left was the running water and the slow drip of ink-stained fluid from the shattered ceiling. Vance cautiously emerged from cover, wading through ankle-deep, murky water. He found the hole leading to the basement and shone his light down. The documentation wall was heavily damaged, but the vault was mostly clear, now washed clean by the devastating flood. Maya and Alara lay exhausted near the collapsed hose line, coughing from the fumes, but alive. It's gone, Maya whispered, shivering. It's gone, Vance confirmed, his voice rough with relief and exhaustion. Washed away. The documentation of its existence was never filed. They had one. But the price was high, a destroyed police cruiser, a ruined library, and a half-collapsed courthouse. And Dr. Alistair Kane was simply a lost page in the corrupted history of the woods. Hours later, the sun finally rose, casting a pale, weak light over the devastation. The paralysis gripping Blackwood and the county seat had lifted the moment the listener dissolved. People woke up confused, noting the extensive water damage and the bizarre silence, unable to remember the hours of terror. Emergency crews, already alerted to the strange disappearance of the police cruiser, were beginning to arrive. Vance, Maya, and Alara were waiting outside the courthouse, now cordoned off as a catastrophic structural failure site. They were exhausted, soaking wet, and covered in grime, but they were alive. Vance had to invent a preliminary report on the spot, a sudden, massive failure of the old water and sewer lines, leading to an interior collapse. It was a lie built on a technical truth, and the highest authority in the county bought it immediately, desperate to avoid total panic. The first thing Vance did was retrieve the two badges, his and Maya's, from Maya's boot. He pinned them back onto their wet uniforms, the weight of the metal feeling different now. "We are back on the clock, Officer Singh," Vance said, his voice flat. "We need to secure the vault and retrieve the keeper's confession before the real cleanup starts." They slipped back into the courthouse basement, now accessible only via a hazardous ladder. The sub-basement archive was a muddy, ruined mess, but the flood had successfully dissolved the listener's essence. They found the archive box marked Hox 7D floating near a broken filing cabinet. The confession, Elias Blackwood, was still inside, protected by its thick wax seal and heavy paper. Vance carefully laid the document on a slab of concrete. "We need to make sure this is the end of it. The confession needs to be filed away, documented as solved so nothing can be summoned again." As Maya carefully sealed the confession into a waterproof evidence bag, Alara pointed to a large, wooden crate that had been wrenched open by the flood's force. "Ethan, look here. This wasn't part of the original probate court documentation. This is a later addition." Inside the crate, protected by a canvas lining, was another file, a modern, clean manila folder, soaking wet but intact, with no official county stamp. The label was handwritten in clear, precise script, secondary binding. L3. Vance opened the wet file with surgical care. Inside were 3 items, a typed, notarized statement from a former county archivist, dated 1995, confessing to knowing about the Blackwood story, a highly detailed map of the entire Cascade foothills, with 7 distinct locations circled in red, 3 of which were marked with the tetrad I symbol, a single, heavy, dark blue LED flashlight, unlike anything used by the local police force. It looked professional and heavily modified. "What is L3? Maya asked, wiping mud from the file. Alara pointed to the map. "The keepers only used the tetrad to contain the entity. They knew if the listener was fully released, it would splinter. It wasn't just one entity, Ethan. It was one concept, the idea of corrupt documentation that anchored itself in the earth. The L3 locations, they are the fragments." Vance picked up the high-powered LED flashlight. It had a single, complex switch and no visible battery compartment. He read the note attached to the flashlight. It was written by the archivist from 1995. "The listener cannot be documented out of existence again. If it fragments, only a focused, non-corruptible light source can redocument its fragments back into the earth. The power must be precise, drawn from a self-contained source. Use the L-beam on the marked locations. Re-establishing the binding requires re-establishing the silence." Vance looked at the map, then at the forest stretching out behind the county seat. Dr. Kane had only released the main body, the anchor, from Property 417A. But the destructive act of the disruption sequence, the flood, had scattered the entity's remnants. "We didn't just destroy it," Vance realized, a sinking feeling in his stomach. "We atomized it. We created 7 new problems." Maya looked at the dark, powerful flashlight in Vance's hand. 7 fragments. "And we only have one light source." and 3 tetrad eyes are already marked. Vance pocketed the file and the specialized flashlight. No one else can know about this, Maya. Not the county, not the state police, not the feds. This is no longer a documented case. This is an undocumented threat. Vance glanced at his mother. Elara, the keeper of secrets, nodded solemnly. We need to track down the locations marked on this map, Vance said, the weight of the past 5 years settling back onto his shoulders, heavier than ever. And we need to use this L-beam to seal these things away before they find another keeper to weaponize them, or another official to document them into existence. Weeks turned into a restless blur for Detective Ethan Vance and Officer Maya Singh. They had returned to their official police duties, the collapsed courthouse and the ruined library now just a backdrop for endless, bureaucratic inquiries into infrastructure failure and insurance fraud. They filed their reports, they answered the questions, and they maintained the lie. They were detectives by day and undocumented wardens by night. Vance had meticulously transcribed the 7L3 locations from the wet map onto a fresh, unmarked piece of paper, then destroyed the original file, along with the keeper's confession. His new mission was a secret war fought in the dark corners of the Cascade foothills, known only to him, Maya, and his mother, Elara. They had established a small, private operations hub in Elara's archive basement. Relying on her historical knowledge and Vance's access to police resources, fuel, maps, and suppressed information regarding any new, small-scale disappearances, the first marked location, L3A, Maya whispered one rainy Tuesday night, tracing a faded line on the map. It's an old logging skid near the Miller Creek tributary. A hiker was reported missing there last week. They found his backpack, torn open, with the tetrad I scrawled in the dirt next to it. The fragments are smaller, but they're still hungry for documentation, Vance replied, checking the heavy, specialized L-beam flashlight. The strange device hummed softly, ready to emit its non-corruptible light source. Elara placed a small canvas bag on the desk. I found what the original keepers used to physically mark their territory, Ethan. Charcoal. The natural substance used to draw the binding. If you redocument the fragments, you must re-establish the barrier immediately. They drove out that night in an unmarked police SUV, a ghost vehicle patrolling ghost trails. They found the logging skid. The woods were thick, wet, and utterly silent, just like the woods near 417A. The feeling of oppressive cold was back, but scaled down, a palpable sense of localized dread. They tracked the symbol to a massive, moss-covered boulder. Scratched into the dirt before it was the sickeningly familiar tetrad eye. It's here, Vance breathed, pulling out the L-beam flashlight. The air shimmered. Unlike the listener's main body, the fragment L3A wasn't a massive, fleshy blob. It was a shifting, translucent distortion, like the outline of 1,000 documents fluttering in a column of smoke, centered on the dirt symbol. Its sound wasn't a roar, but a chaotic whisper of fragmented words, half-finished police reports, torn newspaper headlines, and garbled phone calls. Vance raised the heavy light, flipping the complex switch. The L-beam ignited, a pure, intense pillar of white light, devoid of shadow. It struck the translucent